Shalom, guys. Welcome back to another episode here. I just shot your ministry with Casa de Israel Yara. Thank you for being there. Today, we're going to continue with the weekly Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Becha Alotecha, and it opens up with the setting up of the menorah in the tabernacle, and how Aaron and the priests will dictate how these things will go based on obviously the commandment and the order. So last year we talked about a little bit how they did it in the temple and the procedure they will follow. This year we'll focus a little bit on the cloud and the representation of the cloud and its symbolism, right? And touch on some things that we have already talked about. So it's like a semi-review, looking at it from a different point of view and standpoint, okay? So that being said, let's get started. So like I said, this week's Torah portion is Becha Alotecha. It is in Numbers 8, verse 1 to Numbers 12, verse 6. The Haftarah portion of the prophet's portion is Zechariah chapter 2, verse 10. And the Brit Hadashah portion of the New Testament portion is Revelations chapter 11, verse 1 through 19. Our Torah portion this week, Becha Alotecha, begins with God giving instructions about how Aaron was to service the lamps of the menorah within the holy place of the tabernacle. Each day Aaron was to clean each of the 7 lamps and to refill them with the very purest olive oil. The wicks were then to be bent so that the 6 outer lamps shine towards the 7th and central shaft. The lamps were to be lit daily from evening until morning in a specific sequence, starting from the central lamp, the chamash, and then moving to the right to left. Okay? The portion then continues with the reinstatement of the law of Passover. And this is the second Passover that they do in the desert. It's followed by the description of the cloud of the Lord, the Anah Adonai, right? The cover that covered the tabernacle by day and appeared as a pillar of fire by night. When the cloud lifted, the people would break camp and go to their next location and route to the promised land. When the cloud settled, the people would stop and encamp again. And so where we are right now is where the book of Exodus finishes, and where the book of Leviticus also begins when the tabernacle was dedicated. And so here, after the introduction of the book of Numbers and it commences, now we're going to start the march, and we're going to start the process that we have been planning for since the book of Exodus, right? Book of Exodus and Leviticus, we have been preparing and understanding how the tabernacle is going to go and how we were going to build it, how we're going to use the elements, who we're going to use the elements, and who we're going to be consecrated and separated, right? And all of these elements are the things that we've been talking about, but now the people of Israel are understanding that from this point on, they march and they go into that promise that was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, before we get started, let's do the Torah blessing. ברכו את אדוני חמורה, ברכו אדוני חמורה לעולם בא, ברכו את אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. Bless Adonai who is blessed, bless Adonai who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples and given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. So this week's Torah portion starts the following way. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אל אהרון ואמרת אלה בכלותך את הנרות אל מול פני המנורה ירו שבעת הנרות. And in English, it says the following. The Lord said to Moses, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you set up the lamps, see that all 7 light up the area in front of the lampstand. Aaron did so. And he set up the lamps so that they faced forward on the lampstand, just as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, Numbers 9, 15, 18 says, on the day that the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law, was set up, the cloud covered it. Okay, from evening till morning, the cloud above the tabernacle looked like fire, right? And it's interesting the dynamic of which how the cloud and the pillar of fire would work in the camp. And when it is settled, the fire will come down, the cloud will hover. The moment that the fire will go back up, they will continue their march. Okay, so it says this is how they continue to be. The cloud covered it at night, and it looked like fire. Whenever the cloud lifted above the tent, the Israelites set out. Wherever the cloud settled, the Israelites encamped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at his command, they encamped. As long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, they remained in camp. So now we're gonna start going step by step, based on how does God move, but more also how God acts, right? So they're going to be following the pace that God sets, and they're going to follow God's signs, right? So it says, the imagery of the cloud for deity is ubiquitous in the ancient Near East, okay? In Akkadian text, the term Melamu describes the cloud aura that surrounded the gods and their sanctuary. The term Pilutu denoted the attendant garment of fire in the temple precincts, right? So the concept of a cloud and fire, again, is not something completely new, but the way that is obviously manifested to Israel is a little different, right? It says, in Egyptian murals, deity is often depicted as a winged sun disk surrounded by a storm cloud. And we have seen this before in depictions of Ma'at, where it has wings spread out. The sun is surrounded by the clouds, right? So the concept of nature is very prevalent, again, in ancient Near Eastern societies. In creation epic from Ugarit, right, is another ancient story. Baal is often referred to as the cloud rider, right? So Baal is believed to ride the clouds, who brought forth the fertility of the soil through the beneficent rains, right? So as Baal will cruise through the clouds, rain will fall, and crops will grow, right? So it had a lot to do with fertility and the ability to understand nature and how it worked. Yet the psalmist in the Bible, in the Torah, says that Yahweh, God of Israel, was the one who truly rides on the clouds, who dwells in his holy sanctuary and champions the cause of widows and orphans in Psalm 68, verses 4 and 6. His power over the natural elements was exemplified in withholding rain in the days of Ahab, right? So we're starting to understand that a lot of elements that when they go into the land are going to be very prevalent is if their obedience will reflect if there's rain and crops, or if their disobedience will give them drought, right? And so the land will not yield its fruit. So God is trying to teach Israel that if they obey and they follow him, then everything will go according to its design and structure, right? So, and the first steps that they had to getting used to is following the cloud. Okay, says God leads Israel in its wilderness march not by his voice commands, but by his appointed sign, a cloud encased fire. All right, which you can see the description in Exodus 40, verse 38. During the day, only the cloud is visible. The fire, presumably dimmed by the sunlight, but when night renders the cloud invisible and the luminous fire can be clearly seen. Okay, and so nature-wise is interesting because they're in the desert, so the cloud could cover sun, and during night the pillar will give light in the desert, right? So understanding that they're in a desert and there's no light that can be controlled besides fire. It says the fire is also called kavod, right? It's an element that is understood, especially in the book of Deuteronomy. It talks about it also, that this column of fire and cloud is a representation of God's kavod, right? Kavod in the Hebrew, noun derived from the word kabod in Hebrew. And in English, it is kabad, a three-letter root defined as honor, right? So this image, and you can understand it as a general term, represents honor. It can be represented as glory, abounding, respect, importance, high in renown, fame, prestige, great beauty, splendor, and majesty, right? So this word kavod encompasses a lot of things, a lot of important elements of representation when it comes to the cloud and the fire, right? So this cloud and fire symbolically represents God's honor going in front of the people, God's glory going in front of the people, God's abounding respect and importance, and his fame and prestige and great beauty and splendor and majesty is going up in front of the people and leading the people. That's what's leading the camp. That is the example that God is setting, right? He will lead the people and he will guide them and he will dwell among them, right? In his tent, in his tabernacle, right? Now, kavod is also represents a value judge, right? Like a weight, like an ancient Hebrew shekel, and English pound. It parallels the strength and might in contrast of shame and dishonor, right? So this word kavod, root word kavod, represents a lot of weight. It carries weight. It's very important. It's very known, and so that is what's happening with Adonai, right? That's what we see in a couple of Torah portions ago when Moses says, "Show me your glory." That's what God is establishing right now with the people as He leads them. He's establishing His name, His honor, right, and He's giving weight to that which has been manifested in Egypt, and now through the people, if they obey and they represent Him correctly, they will demonstrate God's strength and might and his fame and splendor and how beauty and how important and how glorious and how much weight God's name carries when his people obey him and follow him according to what he decides and establishes. Okay, so Ezekiel, for another example, Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 26 28 says, above the vault over their head was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man, right? It's a prophecy. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, right? And that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Now, this is something that Pastor Gabriel loves to do, and it's pictographical of the Hebrew origins of the letters and what they symbolize in these pictographical representations, right? So what's the original Hebrew word? Picture of kabod, right? Which is the root word of kabod, which is what is used to describe the cloud, right? The cloud that is hovering over the tabernacle and that is leading the people in the desert. So kavod has three Hebrew letters: Kaf, Bet, and Dalet. Kaf, as you see there, represents or is represented by a palm, an open hand that covers, that opens, that allows, and it also, you can see it in the kanaf, right? The wings, the talit or the tzitzit, right? Bet is represented as a house, a tent, a dwelling, which is inside, right? Within is also connected to family, and Dalet, the last Hebrew letter, can represent a door, an entrance, and a pathway, right? A way. So here we see that the root word of the God's image and God's presence, kavod, which is kavod, talks about a hand that's willing to open, to cover, and give us access to that tent, that dwelling place. It gives us family. that hand that gives us access to the tent, it does it through the door, the entrance way. Okay, so Daniel also talks about in a vision of something very important. It says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man." And this is also used for in Ezekiel to describe the prophet and the one that's having the vision. It says coming in the clouds of heaven, right? So here we're starting to see the prophetic message of the clouds of heaven. He approached the ancient days and he was led into his presence. He was given authority, the Son of Man. He was given glory and sovereign power. All nations and all peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So, Matthew 26, verse 62 to 64 says, "Then the high priest stood up and said to Yeshua, Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" So here Jesus is being accused of saying that he will destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. So, but Yeshua, Jesus, remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Yeshua replies, "You have said so. But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming in the clouds of heaven." And so when Yeshua makes this statement, it alludes to all these depictions of clouds, right? Baal, the cloud rider, right? You can see, and you can see how the representation of this prophecy in Daniel, how the man that the Son of Man that is gonna come in the clouds, right? Very prophetic. Jesus is saying that he is that Son of Man that will come in the clouds, that he is the one that will be sitting right at the right hand of power. And when we hear Jesus or Yeshua say this, the people are not so much angry with the fact that he's calling himself the Son of Man or the Messiah, I suppose, but that he is resembling access to the heavenly clouds, right? Access to that heavenly abode that is only Adonai's. And it says a lot about Yeshua when it comes to what does this passage represent, right? One coming in the clouds of heaven, right? Many people have connected it to those that will come with Yeshua, the righteous ones that will come with Yeshua and his coming. They also connected to Israel. They connected to Jerusalem. But at the end of the day, at least for today, very simple, short, clouds, the same way that the cloud hovered over the tabernacle and the cloud led the tabernacle, Yeshua is also given a prophetic message that he will come in the clouds of heaven, meaning coming with authority, right? He will be able to come in God's image and presence, right? That kavod, right? That manifestation, which is the root word kavad, like we said. Right? And this kavad is an open hand, an open palm that covers, that opens, that allows us access to the tent, to the dwelling, the house of God, to the family of God. That is the door, that is the entrance and the pathway, right? So here, Yeshua is saying, I will give the hand and the access to the house of my Father through the door. I become the door. I become the access point. And that cloud that was hovering over the tabernacle and that cloud that was leading the people was the one that was leading and giving access into God's presence in the desert. And Yeshua saying, I will be giving that authority. I'll be given the authority to come back with the representation of the Messianic age, the Messianic moment in which all authority is given to the Son, and the Son eventually will give it back to the Father. So the clouds of heaven, the cloud in the desert that is going to lead the people, that is going to abide above the tabernacle, represents God's honor, God's glory. It represents God's authority. And the people of Israel are going to start to learn that as long as you follow God's honor and God's glory in the desert, in the in the trials and tribulations of the test, His name holds weight. His name is strong and mighty, and His name is famous, and is important, and is respected, and is abounding. And we're called to honor Him and follow Him. So Yeshua will be coming in the clouds, and we will be called to follow Him, because to Him is given all the authority above, in heaven and on earth. So that's all I got for this week. I hope you guys learned something new. If you didn't, if you reviewed, I am glad. I don't know anything. I just know what I know. So I hope you learn. Have a great week. Shavu Atov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.